when I was in college and did my BA in English honors, and all my friends were staying on in college to do an MA, and I said, "What for? You're not planning to work. Why are you doing an MA?" Well, they were all sort of waiting. I said, "I'm going to work. I am going to do something in my life." So after my BA, I had through college I'd been very interested in radio, television. That time there was no TV, talking about a long time ago. But I used to go and work, do little things, programs for TV, for radio. Then TV began in India. I was just out of college, but all the radio people had moved to TV. So I went there and said, "Can't I work? Can't I do something?" They said, they were all new to the whole thing. And there were two 1 hour programs live a week. That's all. Television started in Delhi with that. So they said, I didn't know anything about anything. They said, "Oh, you can help with makeup and costumes." So I said, "Take care, I'll do it." At least I was there. That's where it all started. And I continued to do radio and little bits could help. I was still very young. Then, fortunately for me, my father got posted to New York with the UN, and I went with them. By now, I was about 21 or so. And I said, "I'm going to study television," because that's all I knew that time. So, in New York, I did a course in New York University, but that was radio, television, and film. And the each of the students had to work on someone else's program and make your own program. So the first time I handled film they say learn editing. The first time I handled film, put two shots together and looked at it, it was a whole new world. And I'll never forget that moment, because I said, what cinema can do, what power, I've got to do cinema. I'm going to concentrate on cinema. And I did, and then in New York, I never cared for New York or living in America, even though my parents were there. I said I want to study film, and that was the early years of the French New Wave, and I knew a little bit of French. I said, I want to go to France. And there were no Indians in France. Nobody knew France. I knew very little French. But I said, that is the home of cinema. That's where I have to go. My parents were very wonderful people. They just looked so astounded. They said, Paris? I got myself admission in the French film school. I wrote to them and they said, okay. I said, I'm going to Paris. So they said, all right, go. And I said, give me $150 a month, I'll manage. So at the end of the month, I didn't have enough food to eat, but it didn't matter at all. I was just very happy to be in Paris. But there were no Indians there were no Indian restaurants. There was the embassy and 2 or 3 other people in Paris, but I managed. I learned French so that's why everyone says, your accent is very French, because I didn't study in a school. I learned around Paris, and I went to film school, but I got delayed getting there. So they said, you come to the classes, but not as a formal student. So I said, okay. I went to the classes. And I was very lucky. I had an introduction through Murray Seaton, who used to be in India and had written a book on Satyajit Ray. And she introduced me to a couple of people in Paris. One was a big name director, Chris Marker. So I rang up and I said, can I come and see you? And he said, come. Very nice man. He did long documentary films. So I said, I want to work and learn. So he said, you can be a stagiaire, which stagiaire is an apprentice, with Alain Resnais. At that time, Alain Resnais was like a god, and I got that. So I went to work on his film as an apprentice. So I was just hanging around, watching, learning what was happening, how it was all working out. It was an incredible experience. And then Murray Seaton also introduced me to Satyajit Ray. I spent a year, no, not at that time, I spent a year in Paris at the film school as a stagiaire. Then I worked as an apprentice with Alain Resnais. And then I now don't remember how it happened, but I got the same kind of thing as an apprentice with Claude Chabrol. Chabrol was also a legendary figure at that time. And he was, so I went and worked with him also. I learned a lot from that experience. And then I was not a regular student at the film school anymore, and I thought I'll go back to New York to my parents, also starving, never got enough to eat. And I thought now it was a 3-month break, so I said I'll go back. So I wrote to my parents, so they said okay, come back. And then I got a job in New York with various companies doing little bits of film here and there, and photography. I loved photography. I was quite a good photographer. So I worked there for a year or so, and then I said, enough, I'm going back to Paris. Then I went back to Paris and I worked as a film editor. Because I said, if you want to direct films, you have to know either editing or camera. You cannot understand how to create a film if you don't know some technical aspect of it. So I worked as a film editor for a year in Paris. It was an incredibly wonderful experience. And then I wrote to Satyajit Ray through Marie Seaton, and she gave me an intro. And I wrote to him and I gave him, I said, this is what I'm doing and could I come and work with you? And he said, all right, come. So I packed up and came back to Delhi. Now my parents had come back to Delhi also. So in this same house, but it wasn't like this then. And within 2 days I went off to Calcutta to see Satyajit Ray. And alas, he was going to do a film with, I think it was 20th Century Fox. He'd written the script, and it was going to be in English. Since I don't know Bengali, he said, it's okay, you can come. But then when I went to see him, he said the whole project has collapsed. So I said, what happened? He said, they wanted him to come and shoot in America. And he said, I will not shoot anywhere except in India. Either I shoot it here or I'm not going to do it. So he told me that that project had fallen through. Then years later, that film got made. It was called E.T. And it was his script. And he told me it was Spielberg, I think, who made the film. And when Spielberg discovered that that script and the drawing of that little character was Satyajit Ray's drawing, he was appalled. And he went to meet Ray to apologize. He said, they never told me it was your script. I would never have done it. So Satyajit Ray said, doesn't matter, it's okay. Because there was never acknowledged that it was Ray's script, Ray's drawings. So many years later, when I wrote my book on the new Indian cinema, I rang him up and I said, can I please quote this? Because I think it is appalling that you went through this. He said, no, Aruna, don't write about it. Forget it now. It was long ago. But a few people do know it, but I think it's something that should be known. So I'm telling you. But it was incredible. Then he said, go back to Delhi, learn Bengali, then you can come back and work with me. I came back to Delhi. I started learning Bengali, but not working out. And I was very keen to make my own film, so I made a short film. I asked all my friends to give me 500, 1,000 rupees each, and I made a 10-minute film with a friend who did the shooting. And it was an abstract kind of film called The Mughals. It was about the Mughal Empire in Delhi, and it had some live action in it also. Now I don't remember, it was so long ago. But I managed to sell it to the Ministry Department of Tourism and to another company who took it. So I was thrilled. I was able to return the money I'd borrowed from all my friends, and it was the beginning of my life, if you like. So then this film got sold, and then I thought, now I'm set. But I had no desire to go to Bombay. I did not want to work with the film industry in Bombay. It was not my thing. But So I just stayed here. Then I don't know. I did things on television. I made a couple of films for TV. I made a film for Films Division, etc. And then German television had just set up their studio in Delhi, and they were wanting to make films in India and Asia. So they asked me to come and work with them. Because earlier, before going, I had worked a year with Max Miller Bhavan, which was also just setting up in Delhi. And I had met this German journalist through my sister, who was a very well-known journalist at that time. She's a lot older than me. And he said, why don't you come and work with Max Miller Bhavan? I said, no, come. So there were just three of us. There was the director who was German, one Indian, and me. And we set up Max Miller Bhavan in Connaught Place. Even Max Miller Bhavan, a couple of years ago, for their 50th anniversary, recognized it and said, talk about these early years. So I worked for a year. Then things went wrong. I had a car accident, and I was in hospital for a few years. And then my father said, what do you want to do? So I said, I want to go to Europe and I want to properly study French and German. So I went back for a year, and I went to school in Germany, and then I went to Paris, and then I came back. And then I started working with German television. Although when they said, I said, I haven't come back to India to work with the Germans. So they said, no, come, Max Miller Bhavan, and you studied film, you come and work with us. I didn't really want to, but they said they were going to shoot a film in Thailand. Now, nobody at that time in India knew Asia at all, just no contact. I said, Thailand? I said, okay, but you'll have to give me 3-4 days off. I want to go and see Angkor Wat in Cambodia. They said, all right. So I went with them to Bangkok for a month. I took 4 days off. I took a train and a bus across the border and went to see Angkor Wat. And it was 60, in the middle 60s. There were very few people there. It was not a tourism organization, but what an incredible experience that was. Then I came back to India, then did my own thing for a while, and then I got married. I had met this Swedish person in New York when I'd been there, and this had gone on for some time, and then so I said, okay, let's get married. But I said, we'll get married now. He said, but I'm going back in 4 days. I said, so before you go back, we'll get married. I was mad. And I came back, told my parents, they knew him, and they said, now? I said, yeah, in the next 3 days. So we got married. He went back to Stockholm. I stayed here, finished all my stuff, and then I went to Europe. But I said, I'm not going to live in Sweden. I'm not going to learn Swedish, a language spoken by, 4 million people? That's half the population of Delhi then. So I'm going to live in Paris. So I lived in Paris. And then I continued to work on various things. And the incredible thing was, this was, when I went, after getting married, I went back, was in March 1968. And I landed in Paris the day what is now accepted as the beginning of the May 68 revolution began, that day. And so I was right in the middle of what was going on in Paris, and it was an incredible experience. At the Cinémathèque Française, there was a big fight, and Jean-Luc Godard's glasses were broken, and the young people were up in arms, and then we were out at night protesting and tear gas, and I was still wearing a sari because that's all we wore those days. Women didn't wear pants, they wore their long dresses or dresses. So I wore my sari. It was not even salwar kameez was not it hadn't come into fashion then. So running from the police with the tear gas, it was fantastic experience. And then we went to the Sorbonne. Dilip Patgaonkar, he was a very good friend of mine. We met in Paris, and he and I and somebody else, we went to the Sorbonne to listen to Jean-Paul Sartre give a speech. And there was such a crowd of young people. So we couldn't enter the main hall, so we were outside, but they put loudspeakers everywhere. And he apologized to the students. He said that the Communist Party did not support you, and I apologize because what you're doing is incredible. Paris was, everything had stopped. Total, nothing was working. And people were happy and laughing and talking, and 3 weeks this went on. Then de Gaulle came back and everything went back to normal. But the Communist Party apologized to the students that they did not support them and take over. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience. So I stayed on in Paris, and I also would keep going to Stockholm. Then I made 4 films for Swedish television on India, so I was coming back to India a lot. And then my Swedish husband, then he got posted to London as head of a new media organization that the Europeans set up in London. So then I said, now I can't stay in Paris, I have to move to London. So I moved to London. I made a film for Canadian Center in Canada. I don't know how that happened, but I made a film for them and edited, of course, in London. And then I met a lot of Indians around London. This was in 72, 71. And I found the Indians living in London constantly talking about India. And if somebody comes from India, they say, oh, what's happening? How are things there? And I thought to myself, these people have lived here 20, 30 years, but their hearts and souls and minds are in India. I'm not going to be like that. I'm going back. So I told my husband, sorry, I cannot live here. I'm going home. Just before that, the whole new wave in India had started. And I would go to Bombay, and I met all the young students who were just graduating from Pune. I went to Pune. I was making films. I was doing many different things in the film world. And I was doing some research, and then they were saying, come and talk and tell us about all this. So I was doing all that. But I met Kumar and Mani, Kumar Shani and Mani. That time they just come out of film school, were making their first films. So all of them I knew, and then I started writing. And I wrote my PhD thesis, which I had registered for in Paris when I was there earlier. You go through a preliminary exam after 1 year, and then they said they give you 5 years to write your thesis. So having passed that exam, I was very happy. Then I was doing everything else. Then the 5th year came, and then my Indian husband said, why don't you write it? So I sat and wrote that thesis, went back to Paris to present it. I got my PhD at the University of Paris, and then I came back to India. We shifted back to India. He wanted to come back, I wanted to come back. So he was a diplomat, and that time he was ambassador in Nigeria. That's where I wrote my thesis. And then he said, enough, I'm going back. And I always wanted to come back to India. I couldn't think of living anywhere else long term. So we moved back, and that thesis got published as a book. That's Liberty and License in the Indian Cinema. It was the first real book on Indian cinema. One young woman had written a little booklet, I think it's vanished. It's not in any library anywhere. And there was this other one more book on sort of history of cinema. It was written by 2 authors, one British and one Indian. And then my book came out. Then my daughter was born, and I said, I'm not going to... I made a film for Films Division. And then I said, no, I'm going to write. So then I became a writer, and then I was writing a lot. And then I was doing a column in Hindustan Times. I was writing for various papers and magazines and so on. And this went on for quite a while. And then the film festival was starting in India. Then Mr. Gujral said, why don't you come and work? I said, no, I can't. I'm still going all over the place. I can't work. But I then went away, came back, then I helped. I did various little bits of things with the film festival. But now I was mainly concentrating on writing, so there's stacks of my writing somewhere. So now I was really into writing. So I did more books. I didn't write, I edited, I put together. The ICCR asked me to do a book, so I got some top writers in India from Bombay, Chennai, Calcutta to write chapters, and they're all here, those books on Indian cinema, glimpses of Indian cinema. Then I wanted to do a book on Nargis. I went to Bombay. She was lovely. She gave me, I sat with her a long time. She was ready to do it because no one at that time, there were no books on Indian cinema. But then she passed away. Then I went back to meet her husband. So I went to meet him and I said, I'd done this interview with Nargis and I want to do the book. And he made me wait in his office for 2-3 hours, and he was sitting inside and he wouldn't talk to me. Then finally I gave up, and I realized that he was afraid that I would write about Nargis in Raj Kapoor. And I said I was not interested in that. I was interested in Nargis's life, from where she came and where she went. But he didn't know. I showed him my book, my Liberty and License in Indian Cinema. I said, I don't write popular gossip stuff. I want to write a serious book on Nargis as an actress. But he didn't want to do it. He put me off, so I gave it up. I've still got that early material that she gave me, early photographs and the first interview I did with her, but I didn't do it. And came back to Delhi, and then I did another book, did a lot of books, which I edited, I conceived. I said, get people to write on different aspects of Indian cinema. I couldn't write about Tamil and Telugu and Malayalam cinema, but I thought people should know. So I put a lot of books together, I'll show you. And then in the process I also wrote the new Indian cinema, which no one knew anything about. So a publisher asked me to write, Macmillan said, you write on this new cinema which was emerging. This was in the early 80s. So I spent a lot of time on research and talking to all these people whom I knew. So I would go to Bombay, Adur, Gopalakrishnan. The first article on Aravindan outside Kerala I wrote in the Youth Times, because then Youth Times I was doing a column also. I wrote on Aravindan, who became then a very good friend. And so I was trying to introduce normal people to this, what was happening in Indian cinema, which was such an exciting era. They were doing such interesting things. Film Finance Corporation at that time had come up. They were starting to fund these new films, so it was a very exciting period. Then the film festival was only in Delhi at that time. And I, of course, was going to it and helping in some small way, but outside. Chidananda Das Gupta, the very famous writer, was a very close friend. So I known Reena Aparna since she was quite young, 21 when I first met her. Now she's still a friend. But her father particularly was a very dear friend. So I used to see them a lot, and Chitu and they lived just around the corner. And one fine day I had an idea, and Chitu and I were talking about it. We wrote a script together for a film. Then I submitted it to NF Film Finance Corporation, and I was going away for a while. Then I came back and I said, what happened? They said, oh, it's very interesting, but the ending is too sad. Change the ending. And I said, that'll change the whole idea, because that time they were not looking at things that were different and new. And the ending of this film was tragic, because the whole story was a tragedy which Chitu and I had written together. So I said, oh, forget it. I'm not going to do it. I was talking to Chitu and I said, why don't we start a magazine on Asian, African and Latin American cinema? So he said, are you mad? I said, Chitu, nobody knows anything about Asian cinema, nobody knows anything about Latin American, African, though you unheard of. And it's, so we toyed with the idea for a while. We wrote a presentation, but it didn't happen. And then I got asked to go by the American Institute here, to go and do a lecture tour in America, in 4 cities, and to go to a conference in Hawaii. So I went to Hawaii, and it was a conference, and simultaneously was the Hawaii Film Festival, which was then I think 2 years old. And that is where for the first time I saw Asian films. And I came away absolutely stunned. I said, I had no idea there were films like this being made in all these Asian countries. And I met some of the directors, I met some people there, and I said, this is amazing. On the way back, my flight was from Hawaii to Hong Kong. I was stopping overnight by the plane and coming back. And I asked this Thai director who was at Hawaii, I said, there's a festival in Hong Kong. He said, yeah, it started a couple of years ago. Why don't you meet them? So I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I stopped one night in Hong Kong. I went to meet the festival and I said, I really want to come to your festival. It's in April next year. This was, I think, November. So we were in touch, and then they said, okay, come, but we can only give you so much for your airfare, and we'll give you room for a few days. So I went, and I came back and said, it's amazing. Nobody knows about all this. Let's do a magazine on Asian cinema. And I wrote a name on my board and stuck it on my board. And I kept looking at that name. So some days I was discussing it with Chitu, and he said, it's a great idea, but money, how will you do it? I said, somehow got to do it. And I then joined Intac. I had to earn some money. My husband had retired, but he was doing his own thing. He was an environmentalist. Then I talked to the publisher friend who published my book, and he got a designer to do a design for the cover. And but before that, I said, got to do this magazine. I can't do it alone. I want to have someone work with me. And Latika Padgaonkar, Dilip's wife, we'd been very good friends since the time they got married, and she came to Paris, and they lived in Defence Colony. So on my way to Intac, I was working for 2 years, and with Intac I proposed to the International Film Festival of India. At that time Urmila Gupta was the director. I knew them all, of course. So I said, Urmila, why don't you do a section on Asian cinema? She said, oh, Asia Pacific cinema. She said, you do it. So I said, I'll have to go. She said, yeah, you decide where you want to go. We'll arrange it and you organize it. So I chose to go to Manila, Hong Kong, Japan, four places I went to, but I was with Intac, and I told Mapu, who was then the director, I'm going off for, and we were doing a series of, Chidananda and I, for Doordarshan, on the natural environment for Doordarshan, 13 films. So we were commissioning people to make those films. Chitu made the first one and I made the last one. And 11 films we commissioned other people to make. So one of the films we made, we got Bikram Singh, who used to be with the INB ministry. He gave it up, he retired from IAS because he wanted to make films. And Bikram we commissioned to make the film. He proposed Anna Hazare. So one of the 13 films was on Anna Hazare. And one of the filmmakers was Rajiv had just come back from studying in Canada or somewhere. He came to me. Chitu by now was stepping down. He said, I'm going to move to back to Calcutta. And you carry on. So gave Rajiv his first commission, and he keeps announcing even now at PSB, my first commission was given by me, but intact. He made a film. Pramod Mathur made a lovely film in the mountains. It was a very lovely series of films. Now all this was going on, and when I proposed the Asian section to IFFI, and Urmila was very excited about it, so I travelled around, came back, and then I had to go and work with IFFI to set up this 13 films, invited 5-6 people from Asia to come to India for the first time, for Indians to meet Manila director, a Hong Kong Chinese director, a Japanese director. They never knew. So it was the first time, and it was, I don't remember the year. And Intact was going on, then my idea of the magazine was happening. So after that, the festival ended, it went very well, there was a conference. First time people heard about cinema in Asia, because the only ones known at that time were Akira Kurosawa and Satyajit Ray, were the only Asian filmmakers known in the world. This is when we started. One or two filmmakers had been shown in a couple of international festivals, and written about by the European, the Western view. And I always felt that we do a magazine, talk about Asian cinema, but the writing should be by people from that country, because they give you an insight which an outsider cannot give you. So when I read Tadao Sato's article on a Kurosawa film, the things he said made you look at the film in a totally different way. Because as an outsider you miss a lot of nuances and so on. And that all came out. It was such an exciting time. So I was still with Intact. The series of 13 films was coming to an end. I had this dream of doing this magazine. I'd only talked to Chitu about it. And then one morning on my way to Intact, I stopped at Latika. She was then working with UNESCO, mornings only. So I stopped by her place and I said, I didn't even call you because I want to tell you something. I said, I'm going to start this magazine. Will you join me? She said, what a novel idea. What a amazing thought. Yes, I want to. I said, we've got no money. We'll get money to make the magazine, but I don't know if we'll have any money to start with. She said, doesn't matter, I will join. So I said, okay, then we'll work in the afternoons. You do your UNESCO in the morning, I'll go to Intact in the morning, and 2:30 onwards we'll meet here. Okay. And then there was Rashmi, who was still doing her MA, but I had edited the journal for the film festival a year earlier, the daily bulletin, and Rashmi had got her to write something on, because she'd specialized in Russian, and so she knew that part of the world, and they were working for a PhD in Russian. So I said, you want to join? She said, yes. And so the three of us would meet in the afternoons and just laugh. But we managed to do something anyway. But where was the money going to come from? Then the minister of INB at the time had just taken over and was meeting a few people just to see what they felt about the film world and what was happening. So I was asked to come and meet him. And my husband said, carry your dummy of your magazine with you. He said, take it, show it, let's see what happens. So I carried it with me. And then he was talking to me because I'd written on the new Indian cinema and I knew what was going on in that cinema, not the popular cinema. So after we He finished. He said, and what are you doing now other than writing? So I said, since you ask, here, this is what I want to do. I said, I've already shown it to the then director of NFTC, who was in Bombay. And she said, yes, we'll give you 1 lakh, but nothing's happened. So he said, she hasn't given him Malti Tambe Vaidya. I said, she keeps saying yes, but hasn't come. He picked up the phone, rang up Malti Tambe Vaidya, said, give that money now. So there we were, with 1 lakh. And we spent every penny on the magazine. I said, it's not, if you're doing a magazine, it has to be on par with Sight and Sound, Cahiers du Cinema. It must not look third world. Every penny will go on how it looks. At those days, 1 lakh was a lot of money. It was like a crore today. So we spent every penny on that magazine. And that's where my life started. I think at that time we got some great writers to write Cinemaya, Indians and of course all the Asians and some Europeans who were specializing in Asian, but very little, but all Asian writers. So we were discovering this world, and the Indians started looking at it in a different way. The critical writing on Indian cinema was very important because new writers also emerged, established writers like Iqbal Masood, who was very, very good. An analytical article, B.D. Garga, Chitu Dasgupta, etc. But younger writers also, we gave them opportunity to write. I think people started to look at things in a slightly different way, and it encouraged young people wanting to get into the film world also. So cinema became quite a magazine that even filmmakers, established filmmakers today said when we were students we were reading Cinemaya. So and we learned so much from it. So because we were introducing concepts and ideas that had not been written about, even on Indian cinema and other cinemas, but cinema as a form that is not just an entertainment medium, it's a great form of art. And that's what our emphasis was on, that it combines all the arts and when it's really good, it's the highest form of art in a way, because it includes sound, music, images, thoughts, everything comes into cinema. If you're reading a book, you get a lot of ideas when you read and the language is beautiful, but the images, you have to imagine. The cinema gives you those images, then you like them or you don't like them. But it enlarges your horizons in a way that nothing else can. So that became a real passion with all three of us, and then it grew and grew quite a lot and went on for many years. A lot of subscribers all over the world, and it became really well known. Then it came to a stage where I said enough, enough. Then I started the festival. 10 years of Cinemaya. We had a little festival at India International Center. 3 days they gave us. Said we'll show Asian and Indian films. So we did the celebration of Cinemaya's 10 years with a festival there. And at Habitat I asked Sonal Mansingh at that time. I said, Sonal, you do a performance. We were having lunch. So I said, 10th anniversary cinema, what can you do? So she said, what do you want me to do? So I said, okay, you do Bharatnatyam on one side and you do Hindi film songs on the other. She just looked at me and said, what? I said, why don't you try it so you can show where Hindi film dance came from. The origin is the classical dance form, and you do Bharatnatyam, which is the oldest form, so why don't you do it? And she did it. It was a huge success in Habitat in the big auditorium. So she got musicians doing Bollywood film songs and her classical musicians. On one side she did this, we moved to the other side and did Hindi film songs. It was an amazing performance, a lovely, lovely closing for our 10th anniversary celebration. Then people said, but all those films you showed, we never get a chance to see them. So all of us at Cinemaya said, then let's start a festival. How to start a festival. But Habitat was very supportive. We'll give you the auditorium for a week, the whole day, do what you want. So then I went to Sheila Dikshit, she was Chief Minister, and I said, this is what we want to do, and can you support it? The Japan Foundation is supportive. We said, since the only cinema little known was Japan, you bring some films and you bring a couple of people, and they were very supportive. So they did. Then we talked to various embassies, somebody came, we managed. 2 years, by the end of 2 years it had already become big. So the third year we made it competitive. Then we had a jury and the festival just grew. But after 5 years, it had grown so much, everybody wanted to come, and I just said, can't raise so much money. Meanwhile, Neville Tully for 2 years had been coming to see me at the office. I didn't know him. He came here. He said, I know what you're doing, and can't we do it together? And I said, 2 years he went on. Then finally, by now I was really tired, and I said, how to raise so much money and how to do so much. My upstairs was an office, the whole office. That time there were 3, 4, 5, 6 people working there. They were getting paid peanuts, but they said we want to do it. Doesn't matter. Half a day the editorial people were working, and full day 2 or 3 other people were working. So, but really for a pittance, but they wanted to do it. And then when the festival came, there was a little extra money for everyone, which I put aside. I said, this must go. And then Neville went on at me. So finally I said, take it over, the magazine and the festival. He said, we'll do it big, we'll do it at City Fort, we'll do this, we'll do that. So finally I said, okay. We were looking for a proper finance supporter. We thought we could make some arrangement with them, but he really wanted to take it over. And then 2 or 3 other people were interested. So we discussed it among ourselves. The other said, no, we don't want to join them. Ocean, no. I said, well, the money, he'll put a lot of, make it into a really major event internationally, so why not? So we joined them, and he said, I won't do it if you don't stay. So I said, I'm giving because I don't want to do it anymore. No, you have to stay, otherwise it won't work. So all my staff went, all my colleagues, Latika, Hindu, Rashmi left, Shantanu, all that. Indrani, who's with India, with IFI now, everyone moved to Oceans, and I said, okay, 1 year transit. Then he went on, so I had 2 years. So I did do it, and it really grew into a major event. Then the 3rd year I said goodbye. He said, no, then I'm ill, I can't do it. So I did 1 more year. And then I just packed up and moved out. And then they did it for another 2 years, and then it folded up. Because the crisis happened, the art market just collapsed, remember? And his money was coming from art. So when that totally collapsed, he couldn't do it. So the film festival stopped. Then I came back, and then couple of people who'd worked with me there. Then we did a big conference on Asian cinema, Imaging Asia, which still remember. And I got support from ICCR and a lot of things, because this was a conference for 5 days, huge conference. Then I did another conference called RIM, Roots, Identity, Modernity, again Asia. We wanted to now try and get collaborations with India and other Asian countries are now, by now, I said, beyond cinema into music, dance, because it all came from these forms. We did another, again, ICCR supported conference, and well, that's how it's carried on. Shortly after I said, Ocean's enough, I don't want to do this, and I organized this very large conference with ICCR and various government organizations supported it. A lot of people came for some time, and then a couple of years later we did this Roots, Identity, Modernity, because I wanted to bring Asians together to not just write on cinema, but to establish sort of collaborations in the arts, cinema and in the arts. So we had dancers, musicians, writers. Cinema, of course, was the main thing. So let's do more collaborations, but it'll happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And then one fine day, Suresh Jindal, who produced Satyajit Ray's Shatranj Ke Khiladi, was a very good friend over many years, and he turned Buddhist. And one day I was talking to him and he said there is this conference on Buddhism, the first international conference on Buddhism. So I went along to listen to the Dalai Lama. I managed to get in. And I came back and I said, gosh, this is amazing. So I said, Suresh, why don't we start a festival on Buddhism, Buddhist cinema? Because there are a few festivals on Buddhism in other parts of the world that I've heard about, but in India there's nothing. And India is where Buddhism comes from, and it's now being revived, and this was some years ago. And he said, yeah, great idea, so let's do it. So how are we going to do it? So I didn't know, I didn't have a clue. It was my own initiation into Buddhism. And I got very interested, very emotionally, intellectually involved. And with practically no money, we put together a festival, which is the catalogue here. But we got support again, ICCR, Suresh Goyal was wonderful. And I had one of my friends in Singapore was working on a festival on Buddhism, so we got in touch with all sorts of people and said, send us films. And we did it at ICCR the first year. And I said, but this time, but we're not going to just show films. It's got to be an understanding of Buddhism, and interest in Buddhism is really spreading in India. So the concept was not just films, but every day at 5 o'clock will be a discourse by a monk or a scholar who will talk of Buddhism and give people a chance to ask questions. Every day, so there was a talk. The first year also was Shantum Seth and Geshe Damdol, then head of the Tibet Center in Delhi, and some really incredible people. And I said, let's do simultaneously an art exhibition where the inspiration is Buddhism. So we had Shakti Myra and some great artists, and it was a small hall, but we did an art exhibition, we did talks and discussions, and we showed films.